At 17, I was fresh out of high school. I had the world ahead of me. I was going to college to be a pediatrician. I was going to marry my dream boyfriend and have two children with a white picket fence, live my dream life. And my dad was working with the government National Security Agency. Things had gotten quite good for us, so we were now a middle class family. My mom worked at the National Hospital as one of the senior dispenser in their pharmacy. And Monrovia children, I would say at my age, we weren't really involved in the politics of our time. We're involved in our own politics. So life was booming for us. And then, like I said, we had moved from a community where we didn't know poverty, we didn't know hardship. Growing up, my dad had the only television in that neighborhood. Every child came to watch television in our house. But by the time we moved outside in the most suburban area and we came to that community, then we realized that we were living in a bubble, but not a rich bubble, but a comfortable, closely knitted bubble. My mom left to go to work. My dad did not come home the night before. And so I was the only one at home when the shooting erupted in that part of where we moved at the time. And I tell the story that in 1 minute I was a teenager, and the next minute I was an adult taking care of over 20 people who had come. They were internally displaced. I was the only child of my parent old enough living in the house at the time. So my aunties and those around said I had to take the responsibility of taking care. So you move from that child who was pampered, dependent on everyone, into deciding who sleep where, what documents to find to keep if you had to run, making decisions about if someone died, where you all would bury them. So 1 minute we're sitting there, and then all of a sudden shooting erupted. I have to collect my sister kids, my two younger siblings, and then I became a head of a household. And it never went back to normal until today. Because then by the time my mother came, she was so traumatized that she couldn't do anything. So I had to function for her. I had to think, let's go this place, let's come this place, let's do this. So people would come and they'll say, we need this. And she'll say, talk to Leyma. And I'll be like, I've been waiting for a week for you to come home and take over your life. But eventually I'll realize that that would not be the case, even up until we went to refugee camp. I never saw a dead person until I was 17. That's how protected and sheltered we were. At During that time when we were growing up, if someone died in the next house, they will collect, or in your house, they'll collect all of the children, put them in another house, and take charcoal and put it on your forehead. And the charcoal is trying to shield the eyes of the children from the spirit of the dead person, so that blackness was the black veil. The first time I saw a dead person was when we were walking in late July of 1990. This woman had been shot apparently, but she was still clinging onto her Bible, and the dogs were eating her body. I froze. That was the first time in my entire life I had seen a dead person. And it got so bad that by the time the war ended, I was in my 30s, I could eat with a dead person around me. So you move from being afraid to not being afraid, from being afraid of the shooting to moving around and trying to fend for food in the midst of the shooting. When the war started, yes, they were killing people, shooting people, but as they dragged on, the fighters and those who had the guns begin to think about very creative ways of killing people. Stories are told of women who were walking, coming to a checkpoint, they were pregnant, the soldiers would put a bet on them that she's carrying a boy, no, she's carrying a girl, and they would open up the stomach to know the sex of the child. So these are things that it was really, really bad. And we've been, 14, 15 years since the end of the war, but I think it's going to take us decades to get our humanity back, to get the infrastructure developed, to get us to that place where we can look at each other again and not be suspicious that this person is a potential killer. I was very angry. I was a very, very angry young woman. Growing up, I grew up in a home that I tell people my grandmother, she's 111 and is still alive today. The way we woke up in the morning, my sister Josephine and I, because we were the ones who would sleep in her bedroom, Mom would wake up and kneel down at the foot of her bed. Until this day, I remember her prayers. She started with all powerful, almighty God, and then she thanked him for her children and her grandchildren, and she went on down that line. And so we grew up with a strong sense of God, a strong sense of a prayer answering God. And when the war started, December, we prayed. January, February, March, April, May, June, July. By July, when we had come close to a near-death experience, I didn't want to hear the word God anymore. And so it was just that anger that was taking me. I was just very angry up until the point we left Liberia and went into exile in Ghana. So I really don't think I shielded myself. I think just playing the role as the protector of my mother and my nephew and nieces, or the one who will wake up in the morning and will say, oh, you need to walk 2 hours from here to go and find food for us. I was just existing, I would think. So it wasn't about trying to protect myself from anything or trying to shield myself from anything. I was looking. I had a role to play. And I think my person disconnected from that girl who was out in the streets. My role to play was to go pass through checkpoints. I remember one time they gave me a huge catch of cash to take to my grandmother because they were on the other side and there was no food. And I had to put the cash in my underwear and wear it like a sanitary pad. Because if I had gone through a checkpoint and found that kind of money on me, I could get killed. But even walking alone as a young woman with that kind of money through a checkpoint was a risk. But it was nothing, I never thought about it. It was just that my family needed me. My mother couldn't do it. It was my role. I took the money and many other days I would cross over to different places to get food, either going to get vegetables for us to eat or going to check on this other family member or just going to different places. I still have those images till today, but I think it's just taking myself out of it. And there's this girl who needs to do this for her family. I would name 4 incidents apart from the moments where you have rockets and missiles flying over the building at night, which was like a common occurrence. The first one was in the mid-July of 1990, we went to look for food. And we had queued, my cousin and I, to this store. And we were about to enter the store. You had to have a trained eye. There was this soldier standing. There was something different about him. His uniform was brand new, whereas all of the other soldiers around had old uniforms. So immediately something clicked and I kept my eyes on him. And when it was getting, he kept shaking, no, like don't go in there. He kept, no. And so as we were going closer, because the store was, people were going in to get food. As we were going closer to the doorway, he would, and like maybe 5 people from me, sporadic shooting broke out. So my cousin and I started running in the opposite direction, and we got into this house with many people. We didn't know the people. People just opened their doors and everyone would run in and we're all on the floor. And the shooting lasted for maybe 3-4 hours. But later on, we learned that everyone who had entered that store did not make it out. That was the first time. The second time was when they had the massacre at the Lutheran church in July. The day before the massacre, they came to the guest house and they lined all of us on the wall and took several people from the line and executed them. They picked people who were known government officials. But I remember as a 17-year-old girl having on shorts and being very afraid that the soldiers would rape me. So I took my nephew and put him on my lap after they told us to sit down. But whilst they had the older people on the wall, my mother motioned to me. So I kept moving in a crowd till I finally got to her, and she whispered to me, I have a lot of money tied around my waist. If they kill me, ask for my body. So that was her thing. But fortunately for us, after they carried 1, 2, 3 persons, this guy who used to be married to my aunt came in, and he was ethnic member with the soldiers. He spoke his tribe and said that his in-law and her children were there. And my mother was trying, when they said, show your relatives, she was like pointing to many people, and we all left together. That was the second time. We went to Parliament to protest in the early days of our movement, and the Speaker of Parliament came. He was very angry, and he wanted to know who the leader of the group was. And I stood up and said, I'm the leader. And he said to me, why are you using those women? I don't know where the courage came from. I was so mad. I told him his truth, and he got so mad. But for a second, people thought we were going to fight physically because I was in his face. Unfortunately for him, he was this short. So I could talk over his head. The next day, he came to where we were seated, where we used to protest. And he sat in his car and sent his bodyguard to say that he needed to talk to me. And the bodyguard came and said, the speaker wants to talk to you. I said, well, tell the speaker I'm in my office. Let him get down and walk to me. When I saw him, it was actually, I was, trying to be brave. He opened the door, walked to me, and said, I need to talk to you. I stood up, we walked, and he said, this is to tell you that President Taylor will meet with you all. That was the second thing. And it was like, wow. And then we get to go to meet President Taylor, 2,500 women. And he had instructed his bodyguards that if we're less than 20, they shouldn't allow us in. Half of the group was standing at the university, which is like across the street from the executive mansion. So when we said, so what if we're more than 20? The guy scoffed, laughed, and said, yeah, then come. So I called on my cell phone and told the women to line up, and then you just see this sea of white coming down. So we get in, and the security comes to me and said, the president says you are too many. You should find 10 people to come upstairs in his office to talk to him. I said, show me the way to the president's office. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to tell him no. So I walk past this guy, and I'm going, and 2 or 3 other people following me. And by the time we go up the stairs, and we're going up to get on the elevator, and the guards are running after me and said, this is problematic. Why are you so troublesome? Come back, come back, come back. I said, no, we came to see him. And all of us will see him. It's either he come down to see us or there's no meeting. And then right midway, I think he's watching us on camera. They said, go back. He's coming down to meet you all. At that moment, I was like, okay, we got it. They're giving me a statement to read. And because I was already mad that he was telling us he would meet with 10 people, even though he was coming down. So I was telling my mentor at Twitter, Cooper, that this statement is too sanitized for me to read to this guy. She was like, do whatever you have to do. And so he came outside and they offered us seats, those of us who they had invited up to his platform. And we rejected the seats, so we sat on the floor because the women down were all sitting on the floor. And so then they called me up, and that was when I decided, no, it has to be about the experiences of these women. And what I was hearing every day from those women who were coming to protest was that we were exhausted. We're tired being raped. We're tired begging for food. We're tired running from our homes. We're tired seeing our young children being conscripted. So I just tried to rephrase everything that those women had been saying to us. And we're saying, right now, we're not backing down until you go to the peace table and give us the peace that we need. So there was a lot of anger. There was no fear. There was a lot of anger. There was no fear. But it was that moment that I had to speak the truth for the women. There was a lot of anger. I think there is a moment in everyone's life, we all have it, when you're pushed so far back against the wall. You have two options: allow that wall to swallow you or fight back. And when you're fighting back, even if it is a child, that is when the Liberians will say, you don't give a damn. You're just fighting back. And that is where I was, because I was living the war with those women on a daily basis, whether it was the ones that had been raped repeatedly. One of the leaders of that group, who came every day from the internally displaced camp, had so much energy, was giving people so much hope. One day she sat down with me to tell her story, that the soldiers had come to arrest someone, and she went and stood up for this person. And those soldiers decided to strip her naked in a camp of 20,000 people and ask her to walk butt naked in the streets of that camp and pick up paper. And as she was picking up paper, they were inserting the AK-47 in her private parts. But that incident happened, and afterwards they took her. 5 men raped her, but she came back the next day to protest for peace. And she's telling me the story and say, I will not stop until this stop. So every moment I was standing either in front of a warlord or in front of Taylor's people, it wasn't about me. It was never. Until this day, even up until now, the work that I do, it is not about me. It is about those people that I represent, or those women in other parts of the world, even as we're speaking now, who are going through similar things. Well, growing up, I would say we weren't rich materially, but we're rich with love and affection, and most especially a community. But when you live in that moment, you don't see it. It's now looking back that I see it. When I try to place value. We grew up, first, my dad was older than my mom at least 10 or more years, because they can't really place his age. But they met when she was 15 and he was in his 20s. And by the time she was 17, she had her first daughter. And my sister had polio. So they had to go and live with our grandmother because my dad was dirt poor, as they would say. Then they had their second child less than a year later, another girl. Then the third, another girl. Then the fourth. But by the time they had the second child, we were told that our grandmother invited them to come and live with her because she was buying diapers and milk for the 2 babies. So it was like, let me just have you 2 here. And then they had 2 more kids. And so we grew up with our grandmother, our mother and father in the same house, but basically she was our primary caregiver. And then after me, or before me, my mom found a job working in a pharmacy as a dispenser. And then my grandmother had a friend who had some land next to her house who told my mom, you could pay an installment for this land, but you should build a house for yourself. So my dad used to oversee the building of the house because he did not have a job. And once I was born, he got a job. So technically I was his lucky charm. I'm number 4. So he had 3 kids, no job. And then this 4th daughter comes along and then he lands himself a job. So I became his lucky child. And then a year after I was born, they officially got married and moved into their own house. This 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom they built just next to our grandmother's house. So technically, we were living in their house, but we're still being brought up. When we lived in that community, it was a poor community. It wasn't a rich community, but we didn't know poverty because every child took their bath. So if I went to the next door house and it was 6 p.m., the neighbor gave me a bath and put an oversized t-shirt on me and sent me home. If we came from school and they had not finished making our meal, someone would offer us a meal. The way we lived was our back porch was someone's front porch, and someone's front porch was our kitchen. Like very cluster community. It was not until my father in the early 90s built a house that he called his dream house when we moved out of that community that we knew that people were hungry. When two kids appeared on our doorstep one day and said they had not had breakfast, my sister and I, 17 and 19, look at each other and were like, you 2, 3-year-old and 5-year-old have not eaten, because they came with an empty bowl to our house to say, we're hungry, can you give us food? But all of our growing up years, that was the first time we had seen that. And so when I started the movement, I would say that even though we moved out of that community, but that socialization was solid. The foundation of the South Africans would say Ubuntu, I am because of what we all are, was solid in me. So it's that mindset that I took into the women's movement. I had those 2 children. The third one was on the way. And I realized that. So I gave birth to my third child. He was 7 months preemie, and he was never placed in an incubator. By the time I gave birth, they took me out of the maternity ward and put me on the floor in the hospital. So I slept on the floor in the hallway for a week because I didn't have money. And this baby that was 2 pounds, I used to put in a gown like this. I didn't know that that was the natural incubator. I was just trying to keep him warm. The father of the child had gone, and we didn't see him for several days. But people would pass and hand me bread. Some people would hand me coins. And there was this one woman who came out of her private room in the hospital, and someone had said, oh, there's this beautiful young girl. Because even though I was, 96, I was 24 at the time, I looked like I was 16 because I was less than 100 pounds. So she came and took the baby and I into her hospital room. And when she offered me food and water to bath, I was just crying and crying and crying. And I think she must have listened to me cry for like 30 minutes, and out of nowhere, she just screamed, shut up! And, and she said to me, you need to stop crying. You need to be strong for these children. You may never have money to send them to school, but you finish high school, right? And I said, yes. So you have to start teaching them. You have to. Eventually, my doctor, who used to be my biggest supporter, came back from burying his mother, her that had given birth, paid my hospital bill, and that's how I was able to leave the hospital. And when I got home with that baby, I knew how to braid hair. So I started braiding hair in the community, and people would pay me. So that's how I started, My sister-in-law, she was very nice. She worked at a school, and they gave her 2 slots, and she took the 2 first older children. My daughter now, who's in med school, was 3, and she was about to start pre-K, and my son was 4. So she put them on the scholarship at the school. So I used to stay home, braid hair in the community for people, and they would pay me. And that's how I gradually, but I decided I would be the protector of these children. And then I set a line. I'm trying to look for the word that I would take this and no further. And one of the things that I said was that I would take all of the physical abuse in the privacy of our bedroom. But if my children's father, because I wasn't married to him, if my children's father ever insulted me in public, that was it. And the day he did it, in my heart, it was over. So we started sleeping, his head, my leg, my head, his leg. Eventually, I told him I was moving, and then I went to the refugee camp and hitchhiked my way back. We're in Ghana to Liberia. Before I could get to Liberia, I found out I was 3 months pregnant also. So that was my 4th, who's now at USC. It's been a long journey. I often get questions about, do you have any regrets? I said, no. Because if I regret my life, then I have to regret my kids. And my kids, they're everything to me. I have no regret. And if I regret my life, then I'll be regretting the path that God put me on, because I see all of it as part of the journey to lead me to where I find myself today. And then you can't keep regretting over things that you've either done deliberately or you had no control over. All you have to do is, all of these mistakes that I've made, how do I take it now and maximize it to my benefit and to the benefit of the world? So I'm able to talk my story of abuse. I'm able to talk all of these things, but in the midst of all of that story of abuse, I always say to women, always set that boundary. That's the word I was looking for. Always set that boundary and say, I'm not taking this. And if this person crossed this line. So women always need boundaries. Some days when I tell stories about my youth for years, even now, my kids would be like, gosh, but yes, I mean, alcoholism was one. I used to be a party girl. At one point in time, I can't say my sex life was the best because I had, um, there is this woman who used to work with the UN, and a good friend of mine, she said to me, her mother read my book and said, this old Danish woman said, beautiful story, but too many men. So yes. But one of the things that I sat down to write that book, it was just when I was about to have my fifth child. The only thing I wanted out of everything was to be brutally honest in that book. I didn't know I would win the Nobel Peace Prize, but I had become a leader in my own right in my community and in Africa. And I wanted the African girls to see that. You know, my current husband has came into my life and was quietly trying to tweak things. He's still trying, but he can't get some out. But one of the things that he would do, I think the turning point was when my daughter turned 17 and I drank 17 glasses of wine straight. And he was sitting there looking at me. At that time, we just started dating. He was just looking at me. And the next day he said to me, you need to slow down. But that was my escape from everything that I had gone through, from the movement. Because even as we did the movement, there were traumas that were piling up. And then my sister died in 2006. Then I came to grad school, left my kids back. And it was after grad school that I met him and we talked about it. But one of the days I drove from work and I had this very terrible pain between here and here. I could not, it was one of those nights where I had a lot of gin and tonic. And the next day I went to work and driving back, the pain was bad. So I stopped the car, went to the drugstore, bought pain medication, got in the car, closed the door. The engine was still running, and that was the last thing I remembered. I passed out from the pain. And I wind the glass down and said, I'm okay, I'm okay. And I drove home, walked past my kids. They were sitting on the floor studying. Went into my room. My niece used to live with me. I said to her, bring a bucket. I want to throw up. And she brought the bucket. And afterwards, I remember praying, God, if you heal me, I promise you, I'm done with alcohol. I think I passed out again. And then when I opened my eyes, she was sitting on the bed and said, I was about to call people because you weren't moving and nothing. So I said to her, I'm not going to drink anymore. She said, you sure? I said, yes. Last time my daughter turned 5, my husband brought champagne and then they poured and I was like this. And the kids were like, wow, Leyma, who used to be the queen of alcohol, can no longer taste even a teaspoon of champagne. Oh my God, yeah. My kids, they do that to me. I'm not important in their eyes. 8 wonderful children. I find myself extremely blessed to have those group of young people who know exactly where they're going, but they take so much care of me and they're so concerned about me. If I'm having a bad day, they talk to me, but they also keep me grounded in my calling. It was a long way from Liberia, but it was the perfect space to globalize my very local peace building work. I got in that space not as a Fulbright scholar. I would joke that I was the empty bright scholar because I didn't have any support. I was self supported at school. My roommate, I'm actually wearing a scarf that she usually would send me stuff from Kenya. Noria Abdi is a Kenyan Somalian woman, was my first roommate. And then I would meet people from Afghanistan and from Iraq and from Israel and Palestine. The program at Eastern Mennonite University is such a diverse program with people from everywhere. And I got in there and with fresh from doing the work that I had done in Liberia. So one boy from Indonesia would name me the mother of peace, and that would be my nickname among my peers for a while. The students, particularly, hearing their stories, some of them just getting into their work, some of them having completed that work a long time ago. My friend Noria from Kenya was part of the Wajir Women Peace Initiative, a movement that has started in Kenya of women who begin the peace process in the border town in Kenya. So she already had done. So I was at a place where I was like, wow, different colors, different culture, but same kind of crazy. My kids had moved to Ghana as refugees. I was lonely because my whole world was built around those children. And so I poured myself into my work. And this night, out of nowhere, I had this dream where the voice was telling me, gather the women to pray for peace. So I went to work and went to my boss and said to him, you know, I had this strange dream. And since you're a pastor, my boss at the time was a pastor, I think you should tell the women of the church to come together to pray for peace. And he looked at me and said to me, no, Leyma, the dream bearer is always the dream carrier. If you give your dream to someone, you may never recognize it when you see it the next time. So you have to mobilize those women. And then I was like, but God could not be talking to me because I drink. I'm in a relationship where I'm not married. So everything that the Bible tells you is wrong is what I was reciting to him. And he said, yeah, I know that, but he called you. I always say to people, there is always a myth and misconception about the different religious groups in our world, and that sex strike idea came from a Muslim woman, Asatu Bar Kenneth. Today, she's the deputy of immigrations in Liberia, a career police officer. She was like, we should have a sex strike. You know, the sex strike was basically to get the men mobilized to speak to their buddies who had the guns. So the idea was if the women were not paying attention to their husbands, the husbands would talk to their buddies or they would get involved in some kind of advocacy. Later did we know that the whole idea of a sex strike was the best media strategy. Because at the time we were being ignored. If you look at the state of our world, media is anything sexy, anything they sell. So once we said sex strike, everyone was at our door the next morning wanting to know how a group of African women were going to accomplish a sex strike. So whilst we'll talk about it, but we'll also add the story of the essence of our protest. And the women in our movement go around 9 counties were being told you can't have sex with your husband. So you either put it that you're praying, you're fasting, whatever way you can put it, but until we have peace, we have to do a sex strike. It was more successful in the rural areas than the urban areas because the women were in one particular area. The women took their husbands into the mosques, into the church, and made them to vow to God that they would not bother them for sex until peace came. It worked in some places, but other places it did not work, not in the city. It lasted probably for 2 weeks in the city, and then so we had to re-strategize, do different things here. In our culture, in many other African cultures, including mine, is a curse for a woman to undress, because she's dissatisfied with something. So when we were being arrested in Ghana for lacking the peace hall, we were. I told myself that this was a total contradiction of the spirit of Ubuntu that I talked about, the togetherness. I am because of what we all are. For you, I have been socialized to believe that the weak would be taken care of by the strong, and all of those things that I talked about growing up. When I was being told I was being arrested for obstructing justice, everything that I've ever believed in crumbled before my eyes. And to protest the destruction of my socialization, my childhood, my belief system, I was prepared to strip naked. And when I said I was going to do so, the police let me go. They ran away, and the guys in the room, one of the warlords would later on tell the producers of the film Pray the Devil Back to Hell that there was not a single man in that room that did not question what they've done to contribute to bringing the women to that place where they were willing to disgrace themselves in protest of. Is one thing, because I always get this question, so what stripping naked would have done for a nation where women have been raped? About 65% of the population of women have been raped. There's a huge difference in being forced, your clothes being torn off, than willingly taking off your clothes in protest. That's a huge difference. Sometimes you don't overthink too much when a girl got to do what she has to do for peace, for justice, for human rights. And so, yeah, sometimes the movements will come. My friends in the movement say they know when I'm about to make trouble. There's a way my body will just become tense, and they know that grab her, grab her, grab her. She's going to cause trouble here. Yeah. I would say one person, but I want to say those women that I've worked with across nations, across communities. Gosh, the level of strength. And I like to tell stories. So one of my other trips to Congo, I'm sitting in the room with 100 women, victims of violence. They're all around the table. And each person around that table is telling their story of rape and abuse and hardship. Each person tells the story and they end with how they wanted to take their own life. And then the women came. So I'm writing in my journal, and before long I realized that there was this consistent thread in all of their story. Then the women came. So stop. Who women? These same women. So each of those women who had been raped would reach out to one new rape victim, give her hope that life can be better, take her through Medicare, and then help her to reestablish. And then first I wanted to die. I wanted to kill myself. Then the women came. They took me to the doctor. They gave me food. They took care of my children. And I had hope. Then the women came. Hope. Wanted to die. Then the women came. Hope. That was the consistent thread in all of those 100 testimonies. Well, I think when it comes to the healing process, the one recognition that people must have is that trauma is like a physical wound. Whilst the wound will heal, you always have the scars. And so we all still go around with the scars of the war. It's never, so You may heal that, like if I have a cut, the cut may heal, but people will always know that. So that's what we carry in our hearts, in our minds, in our souls, that we have these wounds, that the scars from these wounds that may never ever go away. I think one of the things is not, no, you can't do anything to minimize the scars. What you do is to try to work your way through healing of the pain, because some people wounds are still very fresh. The way I was able to do mine was to be able to talk about it in different circles and spaces at different times, in different moments, just to talk about it. And today I can talk about my experiences of the war without wanting to revenge, but with a lot of, yes. So that is how I know that I'm healed, but I still carry the scar. I see anger in my life as the fuel, to move me into action. But hate, it immobilizes you. It takes away creativity. And someone will ask you, so what's the difference between anger and hate? Everyone is angry. Dr. King was an angry man. Gandhi was an angry man. Mother Teresa was an angry woman. The difference, the thing that distinguishes a great angry person from a villain is that those who are angry, when you're able to tap into that anger and use it for good. Hitler was an angry man, but his anger turned to hate, and he was able to unleash that. So when you're talking about great men and women of our time or times before us, the one thing that they have in common is that they were all angry. But there was a group of them who decided, I'm going to transform my anger into something great. And there's another group that decide, I will let this turn into hate. And that gangrene in my heart will let me do unto those the same thing that I am upset about in the first place. So anger is a normal thing. It's like water, is fluid. That's when I'm teaching my students. Well, I think today it really and truly, Liberia can be defined as that nation with very resilient people, a generation that saw war. There is not a single household that did not suffer an impact of the war. But it's a group of people who are willing to pick up the broken pieces and move ahead with their lives. And then now you have a new generation of young people who have no clue of what we went through. And our duty now is to tell them that this is the path that we were on. And we cannot study war anymore. We have to find a more safer means of dealing with our issues. So it's a place that is trying to find itself because we lost ourselves for a moment. I think the process is still on for some generation of people. I think the process is still on because it's been 15 years since the end of the war. We've gone through two democratic processes, but it was a mindset. I'll tell you a story. When I used to work with child soldiers many years ago, I was trying to break down rape with some of them. And when I said rape, all of them said to me, no, we never rape anyone. And I realized that they didn't understand the concept. So the question was, did you ever force a woman to have sex? Oh, that? Yeah. Isn't that what women are made for? This is not unique to Liberia. I'll tell you one thing. After I had that situation, my daughter, fast forward maybe 5 or 6 years later or more, we moved to Ghana, and my 8-year-old at the time went to school on International Women's Day, and she's this bubbly young feminist. And she goes to school and tells all of the young children, today is International Women's Day. The boys have to be nice to the girls. And this little boy stands up. This is Ghana. Ghana has never gone to war. And says, sit down and shut up. What are women good for? Just to make babies. When she came home and told me that, my mind went back to my conversation 8 years before. And the only thing that came to my mind was, if you put a gun in that boy's hand, he would do exactly what these boys did. And this is the tax of our now. Because I think it's the same here. The way women are objectified, the way some young people in some communities are socialized to believe that this total sum of a woman is from here to here. Up here is nothing. Until we can change that mindset, we'll continue to have those kinds of horrific rape and abuse with a whole society or a whole generation of young people who doesn't see it as doing anything wrong. Our former president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and Elizabeth Rand, they did the first article for the UN on women, peace, and security. And one of their conclusions on the page or the chapter on sexual violence was that the impact of conflict on women's lives is a reflection of the interaction in peacetime. And that I have seen since I read that in all of the years that I've done my work to be true. I feel sorry for my sons. I have three. I think it's a very difficult place to be the son to a very strong African feminist. No if, but, or whatever. My feminism is unquestionable. We, in our house, do not have the boys thing, because even when the African image try to, say, girls, can you do this? The girls will remind me, we notice that you've been asking us to do a lot of kitchen stuff while your sons are sitting. And then I have to so my daughters, they keep me. But my sons, I tell them that, I try not to talk a lot. I try to lead by example, so I see them pick up stuff, from me, the way they treat women. I hope the way they do it in front of me is how they're doing it when I'm not around. But I tell them that we're equals. There is no way, the way I see the world, men and women, is like your left and right eye. If you leave one person out, you can't see the whole picture clearly. So my sons know that very well. And it's important for me, for them to respect women, for them to understand that we're partners in this world and we are not. So we have this common saying, God didn't take woman from the man's head for him to lord over her. He didn't take from the feet for him to kick her. He took from the side, so that they're equal partners in every venture. So from very young age, those were the kinds of stories that we tell in the house about partnership between men and women. But I often told my sons when they're getting married, I have a special gift for their wives. And it's going to be packaged, and the wife is going to keep it until the day one of them raised their hand on her. Then she has to call me so that we unwrap that gift. And then they say, Mama, what is the gift? I say, it's a cane. I'm going to wrap it nicely and give it to your wife, because the day any of you touch your wives, we'll unwrap that cane. That wife and I will flog the hell out of you. You will never touch another woman in your life. So we have that understanding. So, yeah. I was in the Congo several years ago, and I wrote an article about that experience. And we had gone around with all of these fantastic activists all day. Myself, my good friend Abby Disney, all of us were on that. Jenny Rediker were on that trip. And midway through the trip, that night I had went to my hotel room, sat down to get on my laptop to check emails, and then I heard all this commotion. He's a bad man, he's a bad man. So typical African woman will come from out and put a wrap here. So that's what I had right up here. Ran out of my hotel room, look up, there's this girl screaming, he's a bad man. He wants to do something bad to me. So of course the feminist in me is mobilized right there and then. So everyone came running, police and every different group of people coming running towards. So we go to that room, and whatever they talk in there, these people they dragged this girl out, and they're punching her, beating her. And she's naked, and they're about to throw her in a pickup. So I run there and beg them to release her to me, that whatever the problem was, we could sort it out. And no one was listening to me. This is a big shot international aid worker who had taken this girl in his room to have his way with her. And she was saying that what he tried to do to her was not what they negotiated. And the police came. Instead of protecting her, he got protected and she got beaten and taken away. So I went in my room angry, crying, mad. First thing first, why did I have to be in the Congo to see this at this moment, God? Why is this my life? So those are the moments where I'm just challenging him and asking him questions. And then at the end of it all, this still small voice. And so what do you do about it? You can't fight, but you have your intellect. So I sit down and I write this article and send it off. So I never see anything that I do. And someone would say, so what did writing that article do? It did something. It created the awareness that this is the kind of madness that is happening in countries that are going through conflict. Today, everyone is shocked when they're talking about sexual exploitation in Haiti and other places, but those are the things that I wrote about. To raise awareness, to fight when I'm physically present, and to use my voice to challenge the status quo. I tell people I've always been poor in terms of resources, money, but I'm not a poor person. So the wealth of strength, the wealth of intelligence, the wealth of a platform, I'm going to use it to make good the space that I find myself in. But this is how I teach it to young children. So close your eyes and imagine that the problems of the world is a big round ball. So that's all of the problems of the world, big. And you have every problem on that ball. It is a whole ball, right? And then you write an article to create an awareness. And someone is mobilized to do something about it. Bim! You've chipped off a tiny piece of that ball. Is it whole again? It's not whole anymore because something has been taken out of it. So imagine if all of us were surrounding the problems of the world in this big ball and chipping out our tiny bit. Some people will be creating awareness. Some people will be mobilizing group. By the time we all do what we can do, it's not a whole ball anymore. Maybe 1% of it has been chipped off. You know what you've done? You've saved 1% of the world from a catastrophe. That's how I see it. So I don't see any kind of advocacy, activism, social movement as not benefiting the world. Everything we do towards the greater good of humanity is making an impact. What else do you do? Sit down? I could cry in my room about that issue in the Congo, and it won't change the fact. The next morning, we went to breakfast, and I was able to point the guy out to say, you did this to that girl. So I shamed him, the manager of the hotel, because he thought I was because I was black. But when he woke up that morning and saw me sitting with all these white women at breakfast, he came to greet and try to be nice, and I confronted him there and then. He tried to explain that these girls, they cause problems for their clients. And I was like, no, your clients come and cause problems for these girls. At least for him, there will always be people who will stand up to him. And that's the thing that I tell my children, that every time we back down on tyranny, we embolden them one step further. But every time you confront it, you are telling tyranny that there will always be people that will stand up to you. And if not anything, that is the role that we all have to play in this world. My last stop to end the book tour was in California at Sheryl Sandberg's house. So I had gone to Cheryl's house. It was a wonderful evening. And when she introduced me to give my talk, she said, the Nobel is up tomorrow, and my pick is you, Leyma. And I was like, Cheryl, stop. Don't say that. I don't do these things for accolades. She said, well, but I still pick you. And we laughed, had a great night. But I'd never internalized it. I'd never thought about it. I never saw myself as a Nobel contender. You know, it's not that I'm minimizing, and this is not self-hate. It's just that the work that I did, the work that the women did, was for our future and the future of our children. You know, it was trying to change from existing to having a future. My sister, who lives in France, had a surgery the day before, and she was in ICU. So when you've lost one sister and you're 5 sisters, the rest of the 3, you wash them with a hawk's eye. So I get on this red eye to fly to New York, to fly back to Ghana that same day. I sit next to a guy in his crisp white suit. He's taking off his jacket. I had changed my clothes at the airport, so I wore one of those African boo-boo just to be relaxed on my flight, slippers, tie my hair, and I fell asleep. So we didn't talk to each other. I think I was the only woman in that business class on that flight who wasn't corporate looking, or, you know. So I slept, and in the morning we landed in New York, and I put my phone on. Voice message Phil. Text message inbox Phil. My heart sank. Don't tell me my sister have died and I'm getting all of these sympathy. So I went to the first text message, and it was from Abby. I remember vividly, Nobel. I told you, my friend, you are going to win it one day. And then I went to my voice message, and my husband he said, I'm sitting here crying. I can't move. You won the Nobel Peace Prize. So I turned to this guy sitting next to me and said, sir, I think I just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And he looked at me like, so I didn't look like this. No, I looked like. And then the guy in front of us overheard the conversation, whip out his BlackBerry. And he pulled the picture, turned and looked at me. He said, yep, kiddo, I bet you did. In that moment, I was hugging every man on that flight, even the ones that was sitting next to me that I didn't know. And then Abby called and said, don't move, get off the flight. We're coming to get you. It's crazy. The kids, my son was at EMU too. He had just gone to do his undergrad, and he was in his dorm room because the press people were trying to interview him, and we're trying to keep them. So my kids don't share my last name. So we're trying to keep them away, protecting their privacy. The ones that were, I had one son or daughter living with Abby at the time. And so she couldn't go to school until Abby. So like everything changed. And I had a speaking that afternoon at the church center at the by Riverside Church. I was going to speak and then go on a flight. They could barely fill the room, and by 10 that morning, it was standing room only. So yeah, I been picked up by Abby, got to her apartment. I have to find something decent to wear because there's the media coming to interview me. We do not have an assistant for me. So people are calling, wanting to talk to me. They have to grab my phone from me. It's just like, what the hell is going on here? I wasn't emotional. I couldn't cry. I couldn't laugh because it was unbelievable. So then I get to, they send this limo for me, and I get to the church center. The one thing I remember was Len Reggio standing right in the crowd like this and nodding, just smiling at me. And I go in there, and I think it was ABC or CBS. They already set up in there. So I maybe Abby is the one who will remember all of that, but I don't remember a lot of that day. And then that night, I get on a flight to New York, and I'm praying. I want to cover my head because I just want to be left alone to process this. And from New York to Ghana, I get to the airport in Ghana, and there's the media and the press, and my kids can barely come close to me. And I go home, and the women's organization in Ghana that I work with, some of them had already reached to my home. There was food, there was soft drink, and I'm like, Jesus, what is this? And then I get to Liberia the next day, and there's this sea of white on the airport. It was a morning, early morning, when we decided that was the space that we're going to use to protest. And over 2,500 women show up that day, sea of white. And the moment I won the Nobel, those women were there. People had traveled from their villages to come and see me and see what is this that they said I had won. Oh my God, I barely sleep in my bed for 30 days. If I spend 2 weeks at home, that's a long stretch. Um, but it's changed it. Places that I never imagined someone from my background, the girl from in that closely knitted partial slum community, will be sitting with kings and queens and presidents and leaders of the world, and her voice will be counted in conversations. I'm at a place now after winning the Nobel where people will be digging. But sometimes when I get questions in the media about my life, I say, please patronize me, buy my book. It's all in there. You don't need to go digging. I put everything in there. Yeah. And when I write about the next phase of my life, I'm going to be equally brutally honest about winning the prize and all of the pains and tears that comes with it. Um, Not knowing there is a 5-year thing, the other people would say to be 5 years. It takes 5 years for you to get used to all of this. And I survived my 5th year, December. I did. Because I'm a troublemaker. That's my nature. But also because there was a lot of double standards about the way things were being done. And I needed to call it out for what it was. The double standards of the way we were doing peace and reconciliation and talking about transparency, because President Sirleaf is in the history books of Liberia as the one woman who criticized every regime for appointing their relatives, and she was falling right in that trap. One son was the head of the board of the oil company. Another son was the deputy at the central bank. Another was in charge of national security. I also realized that our movement was the one that was making case for women, and if we kept silent in those moments, there would be critical times when the rest of Liberia would be waiting. We would try to speak afterwards, and no one would listen to us. So it had to come from one of those voices. And one of the things that I fell off with the president, I never really got to be in good books with her again. But one of the things that I remember quite well was going back home and being met by the same ordinary women that I work with, and them coming to me and saying, thank you very much for saying what we all had been saying, but no one would listen to us. Thank you for using your voice on our behalf. Impunity is the big word that hangs over the continent. People can do whatever the hell they want to do. And as long as they still have the money, they still will power, no one will hold them accountable. We're still on a huge fight in Liberia for them to establish some kind of court for someone like Prince Johnson, the warlord, and others who did terrible harm to the Liberian people, to be held accountable for what they've done. How else do we mentor or socialize the next generation of leaders that it's okay to rape, kill, and maim people, and you can be a leader and you protect yourself? No, we need to begin to lay down rules that would really help us to get to the place that we need to get to. People are worried and upset about the level of leadership that we're seeing around the world. Until we can change the way we do justice, truth, peace, reconciliation, and human rights, we will continue to see the worst kind of leaders in any kind of state power, because the world has made it okay for those kind of people to rule. As a child, I was that troublemaker. I was so afraid of punishment, but I was the instigator of trouble. So my sister, who is a bit older than I am, was the real troublemaker. But I was the talkative. I was the one who stirred up things. So my grandmother, even though she's old, she persistently asked my husband, "Are any of your kids like your wife?" Yeah. So I was that person who would go, and I was a very observant child, and I would see things and come home and stir up trouble. Like my parents would tell stories of someone who once upon a time was cheating on their husband. And I would follow this woman, and I came home, and one day they heard them fight, and they went there, and the husband said, but Leyma was the one who led me to where these two lovers will meet. So yeah, I was kind of a troublemaker growing up. In high school, I was very much interested in politics, and I've always been, how do you say it? I've always been an admirer or someone that's been drawn to justice issues. I'm traveling a lot. I'm doing a lot with young people, which I love because I think it's important for us to mentor a next generation of young people to let them know that this can be you. And I'm really loving working with my foundation in Liberia, sending girls, especially to school, and just seeing one group of young people who could barely talk. I'd spent 3 months in Monrovia, and I've been sitting with these little children and listening to, and the young adults, and listening to some of their hope and dreams. And I'm like, wow, these were children who came into this program 5, 6 years ago who could barely express themselves. And today, I mean, one of my favorite moment of my time in Liberia was telling one of my students that we're going to take her off the scholarship because she had misbehaved. And I was set on letting her go. And then these 6 young people walk into my room, ranging from ages 10 to 16. And they came and said, Madam Gbowee, we need to talk to you. And I indulged them, have a seat. What's going on? They said, we came to ask you to reconsider your decision to take our colleague back on the scholarship. And that they had paid a visit to her house. Her grandparents were in no position to send her to school, and that she was just going to end up being a teen mother. Well, at that moment, I just sat there and said, we must be doing something very right. That these young children can come into a room. This is not the world that I know. I'm blessed. That's all I can say. But it's a long way to everything that we do. You can't say we can finish it all. We can play our part, play a tiny role. And most times that's what I say to my kids. You just do what you got to do. My 9-year-old have been saying to me recently, Mommy, I want to be like you. And I said to her, the first thing you need to do is to learn how to use your voice. So if someone came and misbehaved, you have to tell them. So my key message to her as a 9-year-old recently has been, you don't need to be friends with everyone, but you're forced to respect everyone. And everyone doesn't need to be friends with you, but everyone's forced to respect you. And that's the message. So for her 9-year-old ears, I don't have to be your friend, but when you greet me, it is my duty to respond. I don't have to be your friend, but it is my duty to show you respect, and vice versa. I'm giving my last two kids the opportunity to be out of high school because then they're able to process when I'm not around and they're reading stuff about me on the internet. We can have a real nice conversation about stuff. And then also, I won't have any reason to be a politician that I can be easily compromised. My kids would have been educated. I would have done everything that I wanted to do as an activist, and I would just be getting into whatever political space that I'm getting into, get some job done. Yeah. we wait to see what will bring, but I'm definitely thinking about getting politics. So whether it's the Senate, whether it's the presidency, whether it's being a commissioner in my village, whatever it is, I'm definitely at 60 going to retire into politics. I'm a politician. I'm an activist. I'm a politician. I'm a feminist. And people say, why would you say you're a politician? I say, because the personal is political and the political is personal. I doubt if without God I would be where I am. I see my journey as, and that's why I'm able to endure some of the things that I endure. That's why I'm able to keep going. That's why I'm able to really rise above some of the difficulties, because I never see what I do as a day's job. I see it as a call from God. So I'm on a journey of peace activism, but it's also a spiritual journey. I don't know, but I'm trusting God that it's going to be a good path. Whether it leads me into, my husband and I, our dream is to retire in our village on our 50-acre farm. Whether if that is where God leads me and I'm teaching in a community school, awesome. If it leads me into being a great politician, awesome. If it leads me on the world stage, awesome. Wherever it leads me, I know there are good things ahead. That's all I know. Good things are ahead of me.